Hello, and welcome to this webinar. Good morning and good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to the webinar about transatlantic opportunities for farmed insects as food and feed, organized by the International Platform for Insects as Food and Feed, IPIFF, and the North American Coalition on Insect Agriculture, NACIA. I'm Emily Filou. I'm a freelance journalist and the author of Buzzing, a newsletter about insects as food and feed. I've got a terrible cold today, so I'm very sorry. I sound very funny, but I will do my best for everyone to hear me. So today's discussion is going to be split into three main issues. We'll talk about the production of insects as food, the production of insects as feed, and then the use of frass as a fertilizer and how this holds the key to making insect farming a truly circular activity. So just a small a couple of housekeeping points. You can ask questions in the Q&A box throughout the webinar. We'll try to answer a couple at the end of each session. Please, if we can't deal with your question during the session, do feel free to reach out to the speakers after the webinar. And finally, if you've got any technical issues, I'd like to refer you to the tutorial that you received in your registration email. So without further ado, I would like to invite Adriana Casillas, who is the President and CEO of Tebrio and the President of IPIFF, to kick off this webinar. So Adriana, over to you.
Thank you, Emily. Of course, dear ladies and gentlemen, I'm delighted to welcome all of you to this joint IPIFF NACIA webinar event, which will be an excellent opportunity to take stock of the impressive progress done across the European Union and North America in the field of insect farming. So in light of the recent crisis impacting our food system, such as the COVID pandemic and the Russian aggression in Ukraine, the role of new technologies and innovation becomes even more relevant. Additionally, as highlighted in recent FAO publications, we cannot forget that the world is off track to meet most food and agriculture-related sustainable development goals. Across the world, we see a rise in inequalities and implicit hunger or malnutrition. So in developed countries, on the other hand, unsustainable consumption patterns are challenges that affect us all. It therefore becomes urgent to identify opportunities for scaling solutions that can address such issues at regional, national, and global levels. Above all, strengthening the resilience of food system in front of future crises, such as climate change, remains of paramount importance. Insect farming has been recognized as a promising answer to address the agri-food needs of tomorrow, such as the importance to improve self-sufficiency, the urgency to transition towards more resource-efficient circular systems, while also working on addressing our unsustainable dietary partners. In the long run, we hope that the innovative sector, such as ours today, will play a bigger role in accelerating progress on the UN 2030 agenda. That is why today we invite IPIFF and NACIA representatives who will present an overview of the current status of the sector, main trends, and collaboration opportunities of relevance for the European and North America insect sector. In addition, we will also be joined by experts from renewed stakeholders organizations who will shed light on how insect farming may contribute to the future of the food systems. Therefore, we have the right ingredients for a fruitful discussion then. Well, before concluding, I wish to personally thank all the speakers and panelists, our moderator, of course, Emily Filou, who will elegantly guide us during today's discussion, and each and every one of you for joining us today. So I look forward to this interesting webinar, and I hope to continue our discussions in future events, such as the IPIFF workshop held on the 13th of May. So you will all very invited to join. So thank you very much for your attention and had a great webinar.
Thank you so much, Adriana. So now I'd like to invite Virginia Emery to give her opening remarks. Virginia is the president of NACIA's board of directors, and she's also the CEO and founder of Beta Hatch. Virginia.
Hello, thank you, and so much for the opportunity to participate. It's fantastic to see such an international community today on the call. And one of the things that I think we're very excited to share these opportunities to collaborate across not just multiple species of insects, multiple companies and parts of the sector and supply chain, but multiple countries and geographies where we see insect production really starting to fill important market needs in, as Adriana mentioned, food security, in sustainability of our food systems, and improving across the world just different parts of that food supply chain where we know insects are currently and will continue to play important roles. NACIA, the North American Coalition for Insect Agriculture, is a trade organization based in North America to support the development of insects within our food system. We see multiple places where insects can play roles. We'll talk today about their roles in food for humans, in food for animals, and for pets, and we'll talk about the role of frass for nutrition across agriculture. So multiple opportunities, and I'm very excited to be able to introduce our first panel, which will be talking about the role that insects can play in the production of more sustainable food systems. Thank you.
Lovely, thank you very much, Virginia. So, well, Virginia's just set the scene really. So, but yeah, so our first topic will be insects as food. So we've got a couple of presentations from IPIFF and from NACIA, which will give us a bit of an overview of the main trends in the EU and North America. And then we'll follow with a panel discussion that will bring in a couple more speakers so that we've just broadened the discussion. Just remember that you can ask questions in the Q&A box, and then we'll just try and answer some of these at the end of the discussion. So our first presentation will be from Bastien Rabastens, who is the chairman of the IPIFF Working Group Food Safety and Consumer Information and the CEO of Jimenez in France. So Bastien, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. So I'm very glad to speak today in my capacity as the chair of the IPIFF Working Group on food safety and consumer information. In today's presentation, I will briefly cover relevant matter links to the current legislative context in Europe regarding the use of insects in human food, the current status and relevant trend, as well as some opportunities for collaboration. In case you have any question regarding this topic, I invite you to ask your question in the chat box or follow up with the IPIFF Secretariat via email, of course. So first question, very important one. I will start my presentation by highlighting the regulatory context that allows the placing on the EU market of insects and the dairy food products. So are edible insects legal in the EU? Yes. Yes, there are now. And there is a very simple process now that the novel food has been reformed. And this process can be seen as consisting of 4 steps. So first one, you need to submit a dossier and submit the application. Second step, you have an evaluation, which was conducted by the European Food Safety Authority, the EFSA. And then if the EFSA provide positive feedback, the Commission put forward a draft regulation that is voted by European Union member state. And then last step, very important, if the member state votes favorably, you have the assessed novel food product that is added to the Union, and you have the right to put it on the market. More than 20 novel food applications were sent to EFSA, out of which 4 went through the entire process, leading to the authorization for product derived from Tenebrio mollitor, so yellow mealworm, Locusta migratoria, migratory locust, and Aketa domesticus, house cricket. So right now, this is where we are. We have this application received on the green light. And of course, we are also waiting for many more who are on the process I've explained previously. Operators from non-EU country may export such products to the EU under certain conditions. So I invite you to have a look on the IPIFF website for more information. But in a short summary, authorities from third country, that means non-European country, may submit an application to the European Commission in form of a certificate. And so far, the country from where operator may export to the EU are Canada, South Korea, Switzerland, Thailand, Vietnam, and the UK. I hope soon the US also. If you wish to read more about the novel food subject, once again, I will direct you to the IPIFF document. You have a lot of information on the briefing paper that is available on the website of the IPIFF. What is the current status of edible insects in the EU? So right now, more than 9 million of Europeans consume insect-derived food products until 2020. Some of the main category of product placed on the EU market are whole insect, bars and biscuits, snack, crackers, and specialty food ingredients. This product represent about 70% of the market of EU insect-based food product, and these elements are also available in the market fact sheet we released in June 2020. Documents that include key market indicator and some relevant trend that I will elaborate on the next slide because it's very interesting. So in this market fact sheet, we also looked at all the market share of different category of insect-derived products and how it may evolve by the middle of the decade, as illustrated on this slide. So what we can see in here, in short, insect food business operator were asked to indicate which market they will target in the coming year, taking into account the growth and market penetration of the insect sector and other relevant food lifestyle trends. Therefore, these trends are a reflection from 2020 and may evolve in time together with new novel food authorization or changing dietary preference across Europe. For example, consumer will move to a low footprint diet. So if we take a quick look on that, we can see that the whole insect is still a big trend. Once again, it has to be correlated with novel food because before novel food, there were part of the regulation was focused on the fact that you may market whole insect, and also it is what is right now the most common on the markets. That's why it's still a big trend, but we'll have quite an important diminution on, this, on several years because all the other categories are waited to take the lead. And by 2025, paleo, functional food, baked product, and meat-like products will have the highest growth rate in terms of market share. But as we say, it's still prediction, and we will see how it's go by seeing the evolution on the market. But what is interesting for us is to compare now this number we have from the IPIFF shareholder and to see how it will evolve. So I hope to have the opportunity to speak in 5 years to go on this trend and to see how it's evolved. Of course, the Secretariat of the IPIFF plan to take this document in the near future. So you will have more insight if you are following us on the platform. And I will conclude my presentation by highlighting some possible opportunities for collaboration, which are very important, such as, for example, first, the need to anticipate the importance of changing dietary patterns and incorporating that in our business and institutional communication strategy. And for that, we need to ask ourselves where it can go. For example, how we'll look our diet in 10 or 15 years. The second point, which is also very important, is the need to strengthen our scientific base around the nutritional benefit of insects. As so far, we have growing evidence on the health and nutritional advantage of edible insects. And of course, we can prioritize research on a couple of knowledge gaps, as the role, for example, of the role of insect in tackling nutritional deficiency. as iron deficiency is a top nutritional disorder in the world, according to the WHO, there is something to do. And last but not least, very important for you, there are numerous EU funding opportunities, such as the Horizon Europe program, where stakeholders from North American countries may receive funding as part of collaborative projects with EU producer and academia. So if you are looking into consumer research and food science, that can be very, very interesting. And of course, on this note, I look forward to exchanging with Barbara and our two panelists. And for any question you might have, please contact the Secretariat of IPIFF. Thank you for your attention. And of course, if you don't know them, here are the team from the IPIFF Secretariat, so Maya, Alice, Constantine, and our General Secretary, Christophe. Thank you very much.
Great, thank you very much, Bastien. I'd like to invite Akisi Stokes now to give her view from the other side of the pond. Akisi is the CEO of Undergrabs and a member of NACIA. Akisi, over to you.
Good morning. Thank you, Emily, once again for having me today. My name is Akisi Stokes, CEO and co-founder of Undergrabs, and I'll be representing a North American Coalition for Insect Agriculture and talking about transatlantic opportunities for insects as food for humans. Once again, the purpose of NACIA is to help educate and build awareness about insects as a solution for many sectors, not just limited to food, of course, but also as feed for animals and addition fertilizer on the frass. And so within that, when we talk about the current state within the United States, currently edible insects are regulated under the FDA, or Federal Department of Agriculture. But coming as a private sector, as a startup, we have personally experienced that there's not a lot of enforcement around that system. There also is a lot of negative connotation associated with edible insects in the Western market from a mainstream standpoint. However, there are a number of private companies, Beta Hatch, for example, that are growing very well. The private sector is experiencing a lot of growth and is driving some of that popularity. Also, the United States is expected. There's a market growth, especially with the advent of COVID. I think a lot more attention has been given to a lot of the vulnerability around our food supply chain systems. So there definitely is a lot more awareness around Western customers around the need to find different solutions for our food supply chains, in addition to the climate change issues that we're encountering, seeing insects as a way to kind of help fill in the gap for some of the solutions. So I kind of want to focus today on things that from a regulatory standpoint that we need to focus on, priorities, one being policy and regulations, there being a framework around control systems for edible insect market. It can vary from state to state. So individual states within the United States can have their own regulations set around how to produce insects as food for humans. I know in particular in the state of Georgia, there wasn't one. We were the first to actually be sanctioned to produce. And when I say produce, breed, rear, as well as manufacture them into a product. But if you go to a different state, New York or Ohio, that varies. So there needs to be some standardization around how we enforce and what that framework or structure needs to look like. When Bastien talked about the system or evaluation, doing assessments and things of that nature, there's not a lot of standardization or even documentation around that in the US. And so I think there's a large opportunity for that. As well, from a food safety and control standpoint, a lot of the private sector companies do have protocols and controls in place. But again, the FDA doesn't seem to have a framework around what hazard plans need to look like, what the risk plans need to look like for each of those companies, how each company should be breeding. So again, standardization or normalizing, baselining, and having a guidebook or guideline is an opportunity as well for the FDA, for the market. Connecting and growing is another priority. So how do private companies scale production? So although you have quite a few big players who are producing large volumes from an industrial commercialization standpoint in the United States, if you're someone who wants to enter the market, again, there isn't a guideline or a guidebook around how to scale your production. What does it look like? I think there's a huge opportunity. I'm trying to figure out how do we fill in that gap for livestock production. And when you talk about human consumption, how do we scale those companies industrially to support the growth in population and the needs that we have? Capital investment, from a sustainability standpoint, there are some private investors in the edible insect market, but in terms of supporting it from a larger standpoint portfolio, what does that need to look like? There's a gap there. And technology. Again, we deal more with localized farmers, people who are looking, legacy farmers who are looking to transform their farm with technology, but may not have the capital or may not have the knowledge or know-how to do that. Also may not have the connections with the industry stakeholders in order to start up their company. Also, if you're looking for someone to switch from a livestock producer of traditional protein over to edible insects, how do we inform people? How do we do that knowledge share and how they're effectively able to do that? And what are the costs, production costs associated with that for them to make that transformation? Also, when you talk about industry stakeholders, definitely need ambassadors who are helping support, edible. So NACIA, having more organizations like NACIA are helping NACIA to grow in terms of having those industry stakeholders who are supporting edible insect markets and not seeing them as something seeing something as being predatory. Also amplifying sustainability. Yeah, get back here. Amplifying sustainability. So one of the things that we found is when you talk about making edible insects as food for humans, there's a huge opportunity around education and also marketing of that. People not seeing the ick factor as we encounter a lot being associated with insects, them understanding what those environmental and health benefits are, but also helping people translate that into their everyday lives. So much the way that people consume chicken or beef or any other type of traditional protein, to see how they can utilize edible insects in their everyday food usage is something that is definitely a huge opportunity for this market. And when you talk about circular agricultural farming systems, helping educate people on that. For example, when we talk about food, giving science kits or farm kits to people, helping them understand what those different health benefits can be, helping them understand when we talk about circular agriculture, what exactly is it? So helping outline that for people. Also, from a global industry standpoint, we've seen a huge interest from a lot of underdeveloped countries who've reached out to us. Again, when we talk about low ease or breaking into those markets, there are a lot of low tech opportunities that I think that we can take advantage of. But again, there needs to be standardization globally. There are different shipping requirements across the transatlantic. There are also different regulations, again, the different enforcement. So having a repository where people can tap into that information and understanding how to share it. Also, one of the other things that we've seen is also giving people access to protein from a cultural relevance standpoint. I think it's important when you talk about the education and marketing piece, that showing people how it's relevant to their lives. Some people understand sustainability, but that may not necessarily be a major driver for them. So in terms of like promoting or advancing edible insects for humans as food for humans, helping people understand culturally how it relates to them. So presenting it to ways in ways that people can easily the ways that people can easily understand how to enter that protein as a part of their lives. If you have any additional questions for NACIA, please don't hesitate to contact us at info@nacia.org. And I thank you for your time today.
Thank you so much, Akisi. Okay, so now I'd like to open up the discussion and bring a couple more speakers to share their views on where they see insects in the diets of tomorrow and the key challenges that they face in implementing this vision. So we've got two very different speakers, different backgrounds. So, but first let's hear from Luca Bucchini, who is representative of the European Specialist Sport Nutrition Alliance, ESNA. Luca, over to you.
Thank you very much. It's very exciting to be here and discuss the future of insects. I'm not sure about the role of insects in the diet of tomorrow, but I can provide you with some views on their role in sports nutrition as I see it in the future. I think there is a bright future there because our consumers, the consumers of sports nutrition products, the physically active, the athletes, are looking for new ingredients, new solutions. They are innovation seekers. They are often young or anyway interested in new ideas, new problems, and new solutions. However, there are some conditions to be met. I was discussing with a company a few days ago, and the question I had, what is the specific benefit, the nutritional benefit of insects when compared in terms of proteins, when compared to traditional animal protein or plant protein? So I think we need an excellent answer to this question. We have some of the science, but perhaps we need more on specific benefits of insects. The second point is environmental benefits. We know that there are environmental benefits. We know that consumers, including our consumers, care more and more about sustainability, the impact on the environment. There is evidence, but we need more. Authorities are more and more careful in assessing so-called green claims, and with an increased push also by the Commission in this direction. We really need very good evidence of the environment benefits of insects. Third, regulatory. We have a complex system in the EU, which is working, I think, the novel food system. We have seen some important authorizations that may be important also for our industry. Again, however, we have a concern because they have been approved for data protection. So some companies have exclusive use, which is great for the companies, but either the companies can scale up production or there need to be generic authorization. So because the fourth point is that we need supply. We need a lot of supply for insect proteins and insect products to be mainstream in our sector. We need a broad supply.
Great, thank you very much. That was very concise. Now, could I ask Barbara Campbell to share her thoughts on the matter? Barbara is the Regional Director for Atlantic Canada for Natural Products of Canada. So Barbara, if you could give us your thoughts in the next couple of minutes.
Thank you, Emily. Yes, Natural Products Canada has a growing member base of insect farms, and we work closely with NACIA to increase the profile of insect farms here in Canada and help those farms navigate the ever-shifting regulatory frameworks for this sector here. To follow on from Bastien's introduction, we have less human consumption per capita of insects in Canada than you would see in the EU. And insect-containing foods are still considered quite novel here for human consumption. We do see our member companies working to build on that, and we're looking to raise the profile of insects for human food. Where we do see very rapid growth in Canada and aggressive consumer uptake is in pet treats and pet food. So that has outstripped any other consumer adoption trend we're seeing here in Canada. It's a wonderful to see, and we hope that will then be leveraged once insects are into the pet bowls of Canadians, then they will follow and be on their plates. From a regulatory standpoint, I would say perhaps Canada is lagging Europe as well in this part of insect agriculture. Our regulatory framework is shifting. We have Safe Food for Canadians guidelines that govern human consumption of insects here. And we also have a regulatory agency of CFIA that has feed regulations for insects in food, for livestock, and so forth. Those regulations are under amendment. So when I say shifting landscape, I really mean it. We're hoping those new amendments come out late in 2022, and we know better where insects will stand for the future in Canada. We are definitely working hard with our membership to help them navigate the ever-shifting regulatory frameworks. But at this standpoint, it's really about pet adoption. And our major challenge here in Canada is scale. So while we have a few anchor tenants, so to speak, of large-scale insect farms that have been around for several years, much of our membership and much of our companies here in Canada are new and growing and scaling. So that's exciting, that's great, but hopefully that will also produce the kind of tonnage we need to have an impact on our domestic protein supply.
Great, thank you very much, Barbara. I just wonder whether Bastien and Akisi would like to bounce on these two presentations. If you had any thoughts that you wanted to share about these points that Luca and Barbara have raised.
I think I want to comment on when Luca talks about the more research and data. There is a huge opportunity for that. I know in a lot of the customers that we talk to and a lot of other founders in this space, case studies are sharing the data is something that's definitely missing from the landscape. But also, when I think about the type of consumers that we're reaching out to, you can hit people with, there definitely needs to be, in order for the market to grow and for the industry to grow, to have the access to that data. But in terms of how it translates or cascades down to a consumer, a consumer isn't necessarily buying a product or may not necessarily adopt insects as a product based on statistics alone. So there has to be some type of marketing creativity when you think about how food has been marketed throughout our history, and getting people to more easily adopt it into information or data that is digestible for the average consumer, much the same way that I've seen done with the beef industry or with the chicken industry. And growing up a farm myself, when you're talking about food insecurity, that is not necessarily at the top of the list for someone who may be insecure. How you're presenting it to that particular population is also important. And I think there's an opportunity for organizations such as NACIA and IPIFF to figure out ways to market it, make it more palatable to the average consumer, so they are more easily adopting it as a new protein alternative, or rather seeing it as a new protein and not an alternative.
Thank you, Akisi. Bastien, did you want to come in?
Yeah, thank you for the opportunity. Totally align with what say Luca, Barbara, and Akisi. I think it's very important to be aware that the fact that companies right now are scaling and growing, and that we need to have, as say Luca, full access to the market. And what we see in Europe with data protection is point. Of course, the more and more novel food dossier we'll have, the more and more access to the market we'll have. That will help to put more product on the market, that will help to have more data at the end, and to have a very important growth. And I take note also from what say Barbara regarding the fact that right now the trend on Canada is more focused on not on food, but on pet or subsidiary feed market. And I think it's demand that need to be created also. As mentioned, like you see, the marketing on that is very important, and I think it's a point where we need to collaborate with NACIA, with IPIFF to go forward to the study to be better understanding of this new market, and to be able to address it in a good way with the right products. Because on my mind right now, insect food products who are on the market all over the world. We didn't tick all the box regarding what the consumer needs. So it's very important to go forward. And I think events like this are going on a good way. So very interesting to see that.
Thank you very much, Bastien. Sorry, Luca, did you want to come in? Sorry.
Yeah, no, thank you. I just want to react. I think very good comments. I agree that the products, insects need to be explained to consumers. In our particular segment, I think I can't say that all consumers are really following the science, but there is certainly more of an interest in terms of some degree of evidence and, let's say, results that you can, in terms of performance or nutrition, that you can directly experience. So I think that's an angle to keep in mind, that really for our consumers. And very practically now, we do get requests, or we would like to make an insect protein product but we really have a hard time in thinking through the marketing and really in finding the supplies. So I think we need to overcome these 2 points quickly if we want to see many products on the market and really give consumers a chance to appreciate the benefits.
Great, wonderful. Okay, well, I think we've got quite a few questions from the audience. So I was hoping that our panelists might be able to answer some of those. And then the first one I wanted to look at comes from Stefano Casaccia. And his question is, what are the most important and first things that need to be evaluated if one wants to enter as entrepreneur in the insect farming for food producing? So I wonder if, some of the old timers here, Bastien maybe could take a crack at this, or even Akisi, who's obviously sort of been chaperoning a lot of people.
Well, I'm definitely not an old timer, so there are some old timers in the panel. So from a startup perspective, we bootstrapped in the beginning, and it kind of dovetails into the second question I see about financing. So financing was a huge piece of it for us. Although, our entry was very low tech, and we're dealing with a particular, a targeted customer. VC is not for everyone, but there were some private investors that we found. Also, scale probably is one of the things that you definitely need to think about. How many customers are you trying to service, what that product is going to look like. One of the things I think that we ran into was just the amount of burn around that education and marketing piece. So when you talk about it at an industry level, it doesn't change, at a private level either. So how are you going to market to that customer? What type of product? Also, as Luca and Barbara talked about, we decided to switch to fish feed actually because we found it was easier for consumers to understand, and there was a lot more science and data around it. And so those, and just how much runway you have. So those are kind of some of the things you need to think about of, also facility space. When you talk about scaling, there you then get into how much facility or space do you need, and then again regulations, and how long is it going to take you to get the licensing and regulations to produce, and if you're not breeding, if you're getting it from a supplier, that supplier have licenses and permits. So those are a lot of the things that we probably spend a little bit more time on up front, and those are some of the lessons learned.
Thank you, Bastien, and I think Barbara wanted to come into this as well. So if you'd like both to comment on that.
I'd add on to the full list. Oh, sorry.
No, go Barbara, go, please.
The full list of what Akisi said, but also feedstock. So here in Canada, our insects need to be fed either pre-consumer organics or feed that is already approved as a livestock feed in Canada. So we see here the #1 barrier to scaling is access to approved feedstock sources, because we can't do post-consumer organics as feedstock here. So I think that's perhaps underestimated by many small companies, is understanding that 50 tons a day of pre-consumer organics, if you're in a rural area or not a high density population with lots of food production, can be a real barrier to scale. So one of our pieces of advice is feedstock first. You have to feed them every day.
Bastien, would you like to come in?
Yeah, just to add a point to what Barbara and Akisi said, because I think it was very, very well resumed. A very important thing to evaluate when you enter to this market as an entrepreneur is to have a good comprehension of the legal background. I think it's very important on the EU. From what I understand from Akisi's presentation, it's also very important in the US, and the specific access to this market is also to be good to evaluate with the legal background and to be aware of it. It's very important to be successful on that, and of course it will join all the quality requests that Akisi and Barbara mentioned.
Great. Okay. Well, good luck, Stefano. I'd like to take just one more question. This one is about it's about feedstock, and Barbara just mentioned that recently. That's, it's a key consideration. And the question here is, what is IPIFF NACIA's opinion about former foodstuff, canteen, restaurant, restaurant waste containing meat and fish? Will IPIFF NACIA make efforts for this substrate to become authorized in legislation for BASF to animal feed? So, I mean, the question is, about animal feed here, but I think we could certainly sort of look at it from the context of insects as food as well. So I was wondering if, Barbara, maybe if you'd like to comment, since you had some input there, and then sort of if Akisi or Bastien, if you have some insights on that.
It would certainly help our company scale if the definition of approved feedstocks was broadened in Canada. Because there is far more post-consumer organic waste that, for example, black soldier fly larvae could consume than there is pre-consumer. However, that would be a significant undertaking to have that shift from our regulatory framework. So I wouldn't say that's in the near term. That might be a 5-year dream rather than a next year dream. And it will need to be evidence-led. Really, we have to show that, pasteurization and other techniques of ensuring safety come first, and then show the data. It's going to be a data-driven, evidence-based decision to broaden feedstock here in Canada.
Thank you, Barbara. Did Bastien, did you want to come in on this, or Akisi? And we've got just a minute or so left for this session.
Yes, very quickly, and so definitely second what Barbara is saying, and we're looking at regulations that allow our members to innovate and provide a safe product. Again, when we talk about standardization and normalization, and I love that Barbara talks about evidence-based, again, here can vary from state to state. So there needs to be some regulation, some policy around standardization of what post-feed looks like, and also around substrate.
Great. Any final thoughts from anyone? I think we've covered the topic pretty extensively. So if we're all done, then we'll just move on. Thank you very much for to all the panelists on here. I have to say, I do wish black hands were allowed on the EU markets because they're my favorite. But until that's done, we'll move on to the next topic, which is the production of insects for food and feed. So the format will be similar to the one we've just had. So we're just going to have a couple of presentations that will set the scene, and then we'll just bring in some additional speakers. So I would like to start by a presentation from Christophe Tress, who is CEO of Mutatech in France, and who's also the chairman of the IPIFF Working Group on Feed Hygiene and Animal Nutrition. So Christophe, we're all ears.
My name is Christophe Tress. I'm glad to speak today in my capacity as the chair of the IPIFF Working Group on Feed Hygiene and Animal Nutrition. In today's presentation, I will briefly cover relevant matters linked to the current legislative context regarding the use of insects in animal feed, the current status and relevant trends, as well as some opportunities for collaboration. In case you have questions regarding the subjects, I invite you to ask your question in the chat box or follow up with the Secretariat of the IPIFF by email. So allow me to start by referring to a couple of recent regulatory developments on which IPIFF worked on since the beginning of our association, as the aquaculture, the poultry and the pig markets were identified as main targets by our sector. As a general rule in EU, the use of any animal-derived proteins, including insects, in feed for food-producing animal is prohibited. However, this feed ban was partially lifted on the 1st July 2017 in the case of insects PAPs intended for aquaculture animal. This relaxation was recently extended in September 2021 to insect PAPs destinated to poultry and swine species. Here is a general overview of the possibilities to use insect-derived ingredients in animal nutrition. According to the EU legislation, the previously mentioned EU feed ban rules do not apply to whole insect on the right side of the slide. which may be presented used as an animal feed in some EU member states anyhow, nor for fats or oil derived from insects. So as you can see on this slide, that depending on the form of the insects, the potential authorized market are pretty different. When it comes to the use of insect PAPs, proteins derived from 8 species can be used in the EU, with black soldier fly and yellow mealworm being 2 of the most frequently used species. Actually, the pet food market is presently the main target for insects as a feed producer. Several commercial partnerships between insects producers, feed manufacturers, and fish farmers across Europe paved the way for the use of insect-based feed in salmon, for example, trouts or shrimp, and the use of insects in poultry, laying hens, broilers, and pig feed is expected to grow rapidly. Which are the implications expected from the completion of these EU regulatory milestones achieved by our sectors? Actually, exactly 1 year ago, IPIFF published a market fact sheet on the status and expected development of the European insect as a feed sector. It includes several growth scenarios in addition to the authorization of PAPs for the poultry feed, and took into account other regulatory possible developments, such as the diversification of substrates authorized in insect farming, for example, former foodstuff with meat and fish. So such regulatory would play a significant role in upscaling the production capacity of the sector, higher quantity of substrates, then decrease in price. Actually, a few years after the authorization of the insect pass for poultry and pig, those potential application segment will grow rapidly following the aquaculture market. And probably by the end of the decade, the aquaculture will be the first application market for insects products, and not that far away, laying hens, broilers, and pigs that have a potential as well due to the, I would say, the increase of the attention to sustainability and expectation from the consumer on this type of product. So in conclusion, achieving the forecast presented on this slide would depend on how quickly such regulatory opportunities will be unlocked. Now let's talk a few words about opportunities for collaboration between our platforms. Actually, we see numerous opportunities, especially in order to raise awareness, filling knowledge gaps, and addressing challenges at the relevance of relevance at the global level. For example, about naturality, about environmental advantages, and about nutritional benefits, of course. We have seen several papers and literatures about functional properties, animal health and performance, and as well the potential substitution or replacement regarding the use of antibiotics in aquaculture, poultry, or pig farming. So I thank you very much for your attention, and I look forward to exchanging with Liz and our panelists. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Christophe. Okay, so for a US, well, North American perspective, really, I'd like to ask Lizkutsos to join us. She is an NACIA board member and the president of EnviroFlight. Liz, over to you.
Thank you. My name is Lizkutsos. I'm the president of EnviroFlight. And I think we've heard very clearly what NACIA's goals and missions are. So I will jump through those and jump into the discussion of North American insect agriculture for animal feed. So in North America, we raise 3 primary insect species: black soldier fly larvae, crickets, and mealworms. Black soldier fly larvae and mealworms, most notably for animal feed, but also, as we've heard today, for human food applications, and crickets going to both human food and animal feed applications. I think everybody involved in the insect industries understands why insects have created a lot of interest because of their ability to efficiently utilize land, feed, and water to create protein and energy to feed either animals or humans, as we have a rapidly growing population and scarce resources to do so. Where we believe insects in North America integrate into the circular agriculture economy is by their ability to use byproducts from the food and feed industry. And yes, there are restrictions on what we can feed these insects, but I'll talk a little bit about that in a moment. We can use these byproducts that may have no value and then eventually be destined for a landfill or have low value to other animal species, upcycle them using our insect species, create insect products, including meal, oil, whole larvae, and some of the fractionated products that we are now working on and discovering applicability of, as well as frass that we'll hear about later today in the panel. Those can be fed to animals, livestock and pets, or go directly into the human food chain, as we have learned. Some of the major challenges and opportunities that exist in North American industry are related to regulatory approvals. So I have two slides here, one for US and one for Canada. And so in the United States, we have some limited approvals. They're generally for black soldier fly larva derived ingredients, meal, whole dried larvae, and oil. I think what it's clear from this picture is that there's a lot of gaps. We have a lot of species for which we have no approvals at this moment, for example, for cats, and a lot of restrictions to life stages. For example, in dogs, we do have a current approval for black soldier fly larva, meal, whole dried larva, and oil, but it's for adult dogs only. So limitations on what a pet food manufacturer may be able to market their products for. Additionally, there is a grass approval pending for crickets to be fed to adult dogs. The other species limitation we do see in the United States right now is on the aquaculture side. So there's approval for black soldier fly larva in the whole dried form and in meal form for salmonids. And then oil may be fed to all finfish species. We have no approvals at this moment for crustacean species. The approval process is really regulated by the burden of safety, proving that your ingredients are safe for the target species and life stage to which they are being fed. This is a long, comprehensive process. It is very expensive. When these official definitions are finally achieved, though, the market is open to anyone who can meet those definitions. So I think it's really important. This is a great opportunity for collaboration to understand the expense of these trials to generate the safety dossiers is probably better borne by large groups of industry and academics rather than a single organization, since that regulatory approval ends up being broadly defined for all to access. In Canada, as Barbara mentioned, livestock species are regulated, or livestock feeds are regulated by CFIA, pet food is not. And so there is some broader applicability of insect-derived ingredients in pet food in Canada. On the livestock side, and again, as mentioned by Barbara, there's review going on of these approvals, but at the moment, there are some approvals for insects and some specific BSFL approvals, and you'll note that there are maximum inclusion levels for some of those definitions. It's important to note that in Canada, while these approvals exist, in order to sell your ingredient into the animal feed market, you must register your product by company. So a dossier is required, demonstrating generally compositional data, as well as manufacturing data to ensure to CFIA that your ingredient meets the recommendations or requirements expected of the approved definition and application. So this is a great opportunity and a challenge for the industry. What we see is that market development is following approvals. So if we cannot sell, for example, to cat food in the United States, that certainly limits market penetration. Other opportunities and challenges include supply chain. So I think from a sustainability perspective, we all would love to be sourcing and supplying our ingredients locally and regionally. But the reality is that right now, with the small number of producers relative to other protein sources, we need some redundancy in supply chain. So having a clear understanding of how we can move product across state lines and across international borders, I think is very, very important to ensure that our customers know that the supply chain is strong, that they can have multiple suppliers to meet their product needs, be that livestock or pet food. And so I think there's a lot of opportunities for discussions between governmental agencies to ensure that the regulatory process by which product can move between these countries and continents is very clear. And then finally, probably the most comprehensive slide here, and thank you to IPIFF for this lovely graphic. I think there's a tremendous opportunity and a lot of challenges associated with the development of all of the complex processes, equipment, and products that we're developing in these commercial scale facilities. So we really need R&D collaboration from industry, from allied industry, and from academia, and certainly across continents. On the feedstock side, as has been mentioned, in the US and Canada, there are restrictions on what feedstocks may be fed to our insect species. This is to ensure safe and wholesome ingredients are produced. There certainly are literature to support that feedstocks that may not be approved at this moment could provide safe and wholesome species or ingredients for animal feed and human food applications, but that requires a lot of collaborative efforts between industry, academia, and governmental agencies. There's also a lot of work that's been conducted in preparation of feedstocks. How can we transform, say, pre-consumer food waste into a feedstock that's in a substrate form that's appropriate for the insects that we're feeding? And then we also see a lot of, obviously, a tremendous amount of research and development on the rearing environment, the trays, the crates, whatever the substrate material that you're raising your animals in consists of, but also the environmental controls that are required to raise billions of animals under one roof. There's a lot of proprietary information that's being generated in these development of these systems, but certainly the sharing of knowledge and collaboration will only accelerate the development of this industry. On the breeding side, it's critical, obviously, to have breeding animals to create the initial eggs and larvae and nymphs to rear animals and create insect-derived ingredients. A lot of research I know has gone into genetics programs and understanding the underlying genetic potential of these animals, but also to bolster our ability to prevent the risks of colony collapse or disease and be able to quickly and effectively repopulate our facilities should there be a concern. And then finally, on the packaging and processing side, as has been mentioned, there's a lot of value-added properties that insect-derived ingredients have been demonstrated to have. Understanding how we can effectively process our ingredients so that we create a safe, wholesome product for our end customers, but also we optimize those value-added properties so that our consumers, be they insect or be they animals or humans, can readily access those value-added components. And then I think my final thought is on the marketing side, as we have seen that the adoption of insect-derived feeds tends to be better right now in North America than insect-derived foods or foods for humans that contain insect-derived ingredients. We still need a lot of market education, though, both to our potential customers, those that might incorporate insect-derived ingredients into animal feeds, but also to their consumers, why your dog or cat may benefit from insect-derived ingredients, why having a fish fillet on your plate that was fed from a trout that was fed insects may be beneficial to your health and nutrition. So I think there's tremendous opportunities for collaborative efforts across industry, academia, and governmental agencies. And I look forward to participating in the panel discussion. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Liz. And this is really comprehensive and really interesting to see how fast moving this is with so many different moving parts. And so I'd like to broaden up the discussion a little bit and to bring in, the feed manufacturers side, because as Liz said, it's one thing to farm insects, but then it's another to add them, turn them into a finished product. How do you add them to feed formulations? How do you educate consumers about, wanting to consume that sort of insect product? What does it mean? So for that, I'd like to bring in Anton van der Brink, who's Senior Policy and Communications Manager at the European Feed Manufacturers Federation, FEFAC. So Anton, if you could give us your thoughts over the next couple of minutes. Thank you.
Yes, and thank you for the invitation to FEFAC and myself. Just to highlight FEFAC, we're a European Compound Feed Manufacturers Association, and we are really dedicated to representing feed production that is destined for food-producing animals. And looking at the challenges we're facing now, the livestock farming of tomorrow, we're talking about livestock farming, meat consumption. We are facing some societal pressure here to deliver a certain level of sustainability, and sustainability in that regard is to a great deal defined by what goes on in the feed production stage. In the EU, we're having the Farm to Fork strategy, and this has brought, let's say, a new legislative dimension to this discussion. And we're really speaking about the role of livestock farming and meat consumption in a sustainable food system now. So we are asked to justify the right of existence of this of ourselves as the economic sector. So as a feed sector, we need to step up. We need to demonstrate that the resources we use are part of a sustainable system. We need to demonstrate that we are moving towards increased feed autonomy, more important now than ever, or let's say in other words, reduce reliance on feed ingredient imports. So we are still expected to make more of the nutrients that become available within Europe. And yeah, the expectation is certainly that insect production will make a contribution to the mix of future feed resources. A key question is, of course, how big that contribution can reasonably be. It will depend on different factors, what the volumes in feed for food-producing animals could be. Some already highlighted. So in that regard, if we think about livestock farming of tomorrow, there might also be a discussion needed on the insects production of tomorrow. Bear in mind the system-based approach, circular economy approaches. And I think that's where we would see the added value of insect production is to, it's been mentioned, to grasp that potential to use substrates that maybe cannot be used directly in livestock farming already as feed. So we as FIFAC, we have a FIFAC feed sustainability charter where we provide our comprehensive views on sustainable feed production. And in this, we've included a statement where we're open to discuss what we call an intermediate organisms approach, where you could, for example, imagine an organism like insects with the ability to upcycle bionutrients and indirectly provide access to biomass that is currently being wasted. So talking about maybe a next level of nutrient recovery that we can still reach as a feed industry. But yeah, the challenges are clear. So challenge going forward is also the ability to design a stepwise approach to future practices and maybe discover how the upcoming sustainable food systems framework could facilitate this. So this is really the EU's case. This is something we'll see in the coming years really unfold. And yeah, we have to bear in mind that the food-based biomass that is still out there of potential use can be of different quality, can come from different origins. This requires science and knowledge building. But we also need a realistic, it should be in line with a realistic approach in terms of volumes. So it might not make sense to bang on all kinds of legislative doors before a certain market outlet is really saturated. So just it's been the case so far. The fish feed sector in Europe may be playing a key role here, also because it can take away certain concerns of pathogen transfer into the final product. But today I'm happy to see indeed this transatlantic collaboration. Happy to see AFIA speak after me. We've done a webinar with AFIA ourselves in the past year as well. So it will be interesting to see where these continents can learn from each other. And yeah, maybe I'm going to end on safety, which is probably maybe my colleague will start with safety, because something that is of key importance, of course, is the trust that you build as a feed supplier and maintaining that trust. So safety of the product will always remain of key importance. And yeah, you need to remember that when it's feed for food producing animals, if it goes wrong, it can go very wrong, and you can get your product really scarred in reputational terms. But yeah, to end on a positive note, please continue the transatlantic collaboration, and interesting to see the comparison between the regulatory approaches. So some consistency there would certainly help as well. So the market, the global market at least, understands we're talking about the same thing, but certainly wouldn't want to wish one continent to be held back by the other one. So these are my thoughts. I'm happy to pass on to the next panel.
Thank you very much, Anton. Well, now I'd like to ask Leah Wilkinson, who is the Vice President of the American Feed Industry Association, to share her thoughts on this. So Leah, over to you.
Thank you very much for the opportunity to be here today. I'm Leah Wilkinson. I'm Vice President of Public Policy and Education for the American Feed Industry Association. So the American Feed Industry Association, we are a trade association representing our members who manufacture feed, pet food, feed ingredients, and then also who make the equipment that make those different products for our industry here in the United States. I think I can, a lot of the same topics that I was going to discuss have been brought up here this morning, but just to give you some solace that I think in the feed industry, we have a history of being very innovative, right? And so the products that you have are innovative. And we have looked over the course of centuries that we've been feeding animals, right, to always improve the animal nutrition. As Anton said, our job is to provide safe feed so that you and I have safe food to eat, and that we're providing safe food to our pets as well. We're always looking also to improve animal production. We do that by the diets that we provide to those animals, and finding new and innovative ways to either manufacture that diet or the ingredients that we provide in those diets. And then the added aspect there of the environment that Anton mentioned. We're always now looking to how can we reduce that environmental footprint across agriculture. So either with the ingredients that we're using and then the outputs that are coming from the animals, as well as how we're manufacturing the feed. I think another innovative way that you've seen from our industry is the way that we can take byproducts. And we've done it in the past from food processing or ethanol manufacturing here in the United States. And we put those into our animal diets so that they are something that we can make a value of and can help us meet those goals of safety and nutrition for our animals. And then we also have that history of discovering new ingredients, whether it be enzymes and how we can make amino acids be absorbed better. I think this category of products with insects easily fits into that. And if it is a product that is workable and fits within our systems, there will be a way that it can come into our systems. Ultimately, Anton started out with or ended with the safety aspect. I think that is a big part of what we need to be able to prove to bring products to the market. So it depends on safety, that regulatory approval that's needed, and then I'll say the fit within that specific product category. So what do I mean by fit? I think the product needs to be economical, right? Our feed manufacturers produce on a low cost, a low ration basis, right? So there's a low margin there with the product. Product has to be available. So if you're looking at that scale of manufacturing, depending upon the market that you're there has to be that acceptance by consumers, right? And that willingness to utilize that product with their pets or with their livestock. And then that the product is providing what you have that approval for the intended use. Spend a little bit of time talking about the regulatory approval here in the United States, and probably get into this with some of the Q&A. We have 3 pathways here in the United States: a food additive petition, an AAFCO definition, and generally recognized as safe. The ingredients that were mentioned here in the US have gone through the AAFCO review process. All of these review processes take time and they take money. There's research that has to be done. So any collaboration that can be done can help a startup industry like this, right? And to be able to make sure that when the ingredient definition is going in, that it's representative of the different manufacturing processes that are used in your industry, and that it's also looking at the specific species and the life stage that you are intending the product to go for. And it was mentioned, Liz mentioned the limit on how the feedstock. So right now it's limited to that raised on a feedstock composed exclusively of feed grade material. That's what we have here as that limitation in the United States. So that regulatory is very important. Our industry is regulated at the federal level with the Food and Drug Administration, but then also with all of our states. So we have to have those ingredients be approved so that when our manufacturers are bringing products onto the market, that their labels are approved and can be registered in those states for consumers to be able to buy.
Thank you very much, Leah. Okay, well, I was just wondering if Christophe and Liz would like to come in, and especially about the points that were raised on safety, because there's also a question from one of the participants about the risks of disease, parasites, fungi being passed from the substrate to the insect meal, to the animal the meal is being fed to. So perhaps if we could just briefly have a quick chat about these sort of safety points.
Yeah, thank you very much, Emily. I can say rapidly a few words about that. Actually, it was one of the main topic 6 to 7 years ago raised by the European authorities, and there was a kind of opinion, I would say, published by the European Food Safety Authority about that, evaluating any potential risk. And the conclusion of that is that I would say the use of insects does not present any specific risk compared to other PAPs from animal origin, firstly. And secondly, there is a regulatory frame, and all insects producers, they have to comply with that, especially in terms of, I would say, thermal treatment, heating treatment, and analysis of, for example, microbiological situation. So all of that is very much, I would say, within a frame and control. And if a producer wants to sell its insects, PAPs, or any products, he has to submit a dossier to its national authorities and to get the certificate.
Thank you, Christophe. Liz, did you want to add anything from the US perspective, perhaps?
Yeah, I think it's also important to note in the United States, any ingredient manufacturer will be registered with the FDA and will be compliant with the Food Safety Modernization Act, which is very similar, it sounds, to the EU regulations requiring validated systems to ensure safety of ingredients. And there's various ways and levels you can do it, but everybody who's going to be manufacturing ingredients will have gone through like a HACCP analysis and established any concerns or risks, and then how you will mitigate those risks for your potential customer to ensure safety in the feed supply chain.
Great. And I also wanted to bring in sort of Anton and Leah, perhaps more about the process, about how you make feed. So there's a question again from the audience about what additional processing steps are typically used to prepare insect larvae to be used for fish feed. So for example, for biosecurity or nutritional purposes. So I wonder if you could perhaps just shine some light on this, and then maybe just a little bit more broadly speaking about, you know, how do you integrate sort of insect meal or insect products into sort of feed formulations more generally?
Anton, how about I'll take a start. So here in the United States, these products are either approved as a meal or an oil, right? And I know there's a question in there about that tentative status, so I can try to address that too. So that's how, you know, all feed manufacturers have their recipe, we'll call it, their formulation for their feed product or their pet food that they're manufacturing. And this would slot in as that source of fat or protein into the diet, depending upon the product that they are making for the species that they are making that diet for. And then it goes through the mixing process, and then it's either made into a pellet, where it's pelletized, or we also have a mash feed, which is not pelleted. Think of it kind of as a crumble, a little bit like your oatmeal, maybe, if you would think of oatmeal without it being wet. So that's just the real simple way, right? We have to make sure that any ingredients that we put into our feed can be homogeneously incorporated into the feed, so that every bite that the animal's taking is that consistent, and they're getting the products that we expect them to be receiving through that diet.
Thank you, Leah. Anton, did you want to add anything?
No, not too much, because indeed I wouldn't be an expert on how you make fish feed and these kind of things. But it's true. I mean, from what I know, it's applied, it's incorporated successfully. But thinking about fish feed, yeah, you have to think indeed about the constituents of what you put in. And at fish feed, it shouldn't sink too fast. It shouldn't float. It should stay at a drop rate that is adequate for a fish to be able to catch out of the water, let's say. So. But as far as I know, I have no, let's say, I haven't heard any particular concerns with the inclusion rate of insect meal vis-a-vis, what it was, soybean meal that has been going into, or fish meal that has been going into fish feed pellets, let's say.
Great, thank you. I'd like to take one last question, which I think is quite relevant, because we have talked about feedstocks earlier, and it's from Grant Vandenberg, who says, a major developing issue in Canada is the competition for pre-consumer organic wastes with very large-scale anaerobic digestion facilities. I know it's an issue in the UK as well. How is this being managed in Europe and elsewhere? So I wonder if anyone had any sort of ideas about sort of observations about this.
I can speak to it if you like. Indeed, so this competition of let's say energy demand for, let's call it biomass in general, it's something very topical, and it's on different levels. Maybe as a feed industry, we have a bit of a love-hate relationship with biofuels, because you could think about crop-based biofuels. There are certain crops that are stimulated in their cultivation because there is an oil component there, rapeseed meal, rapeseed and sunflower, and then the oil goes into biofuel if it doesn't go to food, and then the meal we can pick it up. But you see indeed, particularly in this area where the biomass is not set, let's say, that much identified as a food or a feed or a waste. When it gets into that area, you see that there are stimulation policies for renewable energy or advanced biofuels, which is precisely indeed the kind of these kind of substrates that you might be interested in as well. So we already see that competition in like traditional feed ingredients, like a brewer's grain or a sugar beet pulp, where the downgrading takes place. So indeed, the temptation for owners of this kind of biomass, which is, let's say, close to the waste, to the waste definition, it becomes big if the economic compensation is really there. Today in Europe we're seeing food and bio, let's say, energy production being pinned against each other in that sense. So this competition is real, and at this stage, it's been delegated to the member states level to deal with this competition now, as food security and energy security are both high political topics here.
Okay, thank you. Christophe, Liz, did you have any burning contributions to this? Just 30 seconds, just so that we can keep up with our timings.
I'd love to add on to that. I think this also goes back to the collaborative nature of our needs for the future. Just like any other animal industry, we need to have flexibility in our feedstocks, and that requires a lot of R&D, right? We need to know that it's safe to feed our insects, it provides them the appropriate nutrition, and then ultimately that the ingredient that we make is consistent to be able to supply for the human food. In the swine industry and other feed industries have to be flexible when there is competition for a particular ingredient.
Thank you, Liz. Christophe?
Yeah, Christophe, just one word. Definitely the substrate availability is a key point in the development of the insect sector. Definitely the positioning of an insect producer is to use local substrate, and it's really a key aspect. And of course, this kind of competition somehow will be as well in the hands of, I would say, political, I would say, willingness and choices when we talk about energy, about food and feed.
Wonderful. Thank you very much, Christophe. Okay, well, thank you very much, everyone, for this. We'll just move on to the next topic now, and it's FRAS. I have to say I'm very excited about that particular topic because I predicted at the end of 2021 that 2022 would be the year of FRAS. So I'm keen to see if my prediction is correct and what the panel thinks. So anyway, you're familiar with the format now, so we'll just kick off with a couple of longer presentations and they'll broaden it out. So I'd like to ask Chloe Pan Van P, who is the IPIFF Executive Committee representative in charge of circular economy, to kick us off on that topic. Chloe, over to you, please.
Thanks, Emily. So thanks a lot for the invitation, and I'm really excited to have this this workshop together with NACIA. I think it's really great to work together with our colleagues on the other side of the Atlantic. So just like my colleagues did for the previous two topics, I'm going to go over the legislative context for FRAS. So FRAS is the insect manure. Talk about the current trends that we see at least on the European market, and then what opportunities there are for collaboration between the North America and Europe. Just like for the other presentation, if you have any questions, don't hesitate to reach out to the Secretariat and we'd be very happy to answer. So first thing first, what is FRAS? The definition of FRAS has kept us busy in Europe for quite a few months or years. And we reached a conclusion in September this year. So that's quite exciting. So more generally, FRAS is the insect manure. So that's the dejection of the insects. That's the first product of insect breeding in terms of weight. And what has kept us busy is to define exactly what is in the FRAS. And so we reached the conclusion in September in Europe that FRAS is a mixture of the dejection of the insect as well as some rest of the feeding substrate, dead eggs, and some dead farmed insects that should not exceed 5% in volume and 3% in weight. So it's really this mixture that gives the agricultural properties that we see in the different trials that have been performed in the industry. What is important to stress is that there is no live insects in the FRAS. So the FRAS has to be, in order to be used as a fertilizer, has to be treated at 70 degrees Celsius for an hour. And we need to ensure that there is no live insects in this in the FRAS. This has been really important to be able to define that regulatory context so that we have a level playing field between the different European states, but also so that we can ensure all our different partners that will be using FRAS on their lands that it's absolutely safe and clear what the FRAS is. So where we use the FRAS is three main type of crops. The first one is vegetables such as lettuce. The second one is grain. So we've used it for wheat, for maize, for rapeseed, and so on, as well as some niche crops. And in particular in Europe, we've been using it a lot on vineyards. And what's particularly interesting is the fact that FRAS contains beneficial bacteria that act as plant growth microorganism, improving plants' health and facilitating their absorption of nutrients. which has been quite key in improving soil health. The last bullet point is quite interesting, is that the frass is an organic fertilizer, and it's particularly relevant in Europe, where there is a shortage of organic fertilizer, and it's also key in in Europe's strategy to achieve 25% of organic agricultural land by 2030. As it's formulated in the Farm to Fork strategy led out by the European Union. In terms of the relevant trends that we see in the European market at the moment, first is that we see a lot of demand for organic fertilizer. As I mentioned, with the European trajectory set by the European Commission to have 25% of organic lands by 2030, there is a very large need for organic fertilizer. The context with the crisis in Ukraine at the moment, and the shortage in terms of fertilizer at the moment, also outlines or strengthened the need for alternative source of fertilizer, and the frass has a key role to play in this context. The other part that's important about frass is its ability to improve soil health, and in particular by replacing chemical fertilizer. It enables farmers also to bring organic matter to their soil and improve the soil structure. And we've seen very good results on this in the different trials that have been performed. And last but not least, what has been particularly of interest also by the different players in the industry is the ability that the frass has to store carbon into the soils, and hence playing a role in enabling us to fight global warming. And to conclude, in terms of opportunities for collaboration, there are just a few there on this slide, but I think the collaboration are on different topics. The first one is about research and gathering more results about the performance of frass in different types of culture, in different types of environments. So being able to share results between different players in different geographies is key for accelerating the growth of the sector. And the second thing I would say that is really something where there is a huge opportunity for collaboration is to be able to quantify the carbon storage capacity of the frass and more generally of fertilizer. There's something where in Europe we see a lot of needs from the markets, but at the moment there is a lack of methodology as of how you compute the carbon storage capacity. There's no such thing as standards of how you do that, in contrast, for instance, to how you measure the carbon footprint of a product, where you have like methodologies such as the IPCC methodology that is quite standardized. There's no such thing for carbon storage for fertilizer, despite the fact that it's been outlined as one of the initiatives that could help us reduce global warming. So I think the insect industry, by being able to provide large volumes of fertilizer, could play a role in helping to measure the carbon storage capacity of the frass and more generally then of fertilizers. And on this, I'm done. I'm happy to answer any question.
Thank you very much, Chloe. Okay, well, now I'd like to ask Kelsey Jensen, who is Aspire's FRAS manager and a NACIA founding member, to give us her presentation. So Kelsey, you've got the floor.
Hi, thank you for organizing this webinar. So I wanted to start just by showing this, this neat Google map about edible insects around the world. And I've selected here just to show the actual insect farms, not the restaurants that serve insect or the food manufacturers that use insects in their productions. But I particularly like this visual for how it shows that the insect industry is truly global. And together, we're all making positive impacts to our environment and for food security. And today, I'll go over some of these challenges, but the important thing to know is that we're overcoming them and that the opportunities for FRAS are only going to increase into the future. So firstly, in regard to the impacts of the insect industry to crop farming, I wanted to start by talking about the global protein demand. Protein demand is increasing, and so is the demand for alternative protein sources to conventional meat and dairy. And when we look at the worldwide land use data, we see that we get significantly more calories and protein from crops than we do from animal products. And yet the livestock, meat, and dairy operations use over 75% of all the agricultural land. So the insect industry exemplifies a sustainable alternative protein production practice. And I think that it's possible that with the rise and the reach of edible insect production and adoption into mainstream diets, that we could see a disruption of the conventional protein market, whereby the livestock land could be repurposed for the more efficient crop production. Secondly, regarding the impacts of the insect industry to crop farming, we've really come to realize the environmental consequences of how we've increased our food supply over the last century, but we've achieved this by using chemical fertilizers and pesticides and herbicides, bigger machinery, and more intensive practices. But these methods are what has caused negative effects to our freshwater and our oceans and our biodiversity and our climate. And thankfully, there's now this movement towards reversing this damage by using less intensive land management practices and fewer synthetic products. And this movement is championed by the organic and regenerative farming principles, which are rebuilding the capacity of our soils and help mitigate the further environmental harm. So products like insect frass can be used by all kinds of farmers and growers to nourish their crops while building better soil health, because frass adds the primary, secondary, and micronutrients, but it also adds organic matter and biomolecules, as well, what Chloe mentioned, the beneficial microbes to the soil. And like most natural or organic products, it supports this microbiological activity underground, but then it also contributes to the biodiversity protection above ground, because we're replacing or limiting the use of those chemical alternatives that we're just used to using these days. So the other benefits include improving the capacity of the soil to store the carbon, which Chloe discussed, and really restoring the soil's ability to also balance water storage and availability. So the world of soil health is so fascinating and it's so complicated, and there's a lot that we don't know, but there are these common principles of which FRAS also supports. So the third and last impact that I want to touch on, because it's just so timely, is the sheer demand for diversified fertilizer sources, because we're facing incredible supply shortages and these unprecedented high prices. And so when we couple that with the increasing demand for more naturally grown produce, I just think that this is the year, 2022 is the year for natural fertilizers and soil amendments like insect frass. So with regard to some of the challenges, there are a few. So the first challenge is simply that frass isn't well known or understood. When you say frass, they go, oh, grass, and you know, frass. So the vast majority of the population has never heard of it. And most also don't even know that there's this insect industry that is growing across the world. And so the common question I get was like, how do you collect that? Because they assume that you're collecting it from wild insects, right? So naturally, there's this hesitation for all customers to learn something new, let alone to try something new in their crop. But they are more willing to try it when they see other farmers that are benefiting from it first. And so one of the ways that you can really engage your farmers is to find the farmer champion, because that word of mouth can go a really long way to increase the demand for frass, especially in your local area. So another positive is that we're seeing this incoming generation take ownership of many of the large farms from the previous generations. And this cohort, they're absolutely willingly shifting their farm management practices to be more supportive of soil health and environmental protection. So the next challenge, and Chloe touched on this too, is the challenge about the science behind frass, and that we really need to start boosting the research even more, because there's a lack of scientific study and field trials that empirically demonstrate the safety, efficacy, and uniqueness, as well as the return on investment of using insect frass. And not all insect frass is the same. There's varying levels and types of nutrients within different types of frass. There's different biomolecules, and there's different beneficial microbes. These things depend on the feedstock, the habitat design, the harvesting procedures, and the processing choices. And this isn't a challenge just for frass. This is just true for several natural or organic products, even compost. You can think of the differences between like a municipal green bin compost versus a compost produced by a local farm. They're going to be very different. So unfortunately, when it comes to research, a common limitation is conducting the plant growth trials. Time, space, and costs are a challenge, if not prohibitive, for both insect producers and the farmers. And the cost of lab tests throughout the trials adds up extremely fast as well. So I do encourage all of you to engage with post-secondary institutions and apply for funding to support more trials like this. Thirdly, there are the regulatory landscape changes and different requirements within and between borders of states and nations. It's important that we keep on top of these shifts and differences, and that we prepare well in advance for compliance. And these types of changes and differences will influence how we strategize processing and distribution. There's also the opportunity for us to advise regulators on the best and more meaningful ways to manage insect frass, thereby ensuring that the regulatory frameworks are aligned with producers, processors, and users' needs, and not unnecessary or overly burdensome. And then the last challenge I want to address is the logistics. As with any new industry, we're having to develop supply chains and engage with regional processors and arrange transportation, packaging, and handling solutions. For example, up here in Canada, there's definitely a scarcity of toll processors that are willing to take on organic fertilizers and something like unknown like frass. And this processing industry really needs to be developed to advance the market opportunity for the circular economy of many natural different types of fertilizer products, as well as the less common things like biopesticides and biostimulants that are derived from natural sources. So the processing of frass is also a challenge simply because it's such a dry and small particulate type of product that it's different from the traditional processing of things like compost or manure or feather meal, whereby those materials are either already wet or they can be steam treated. The same is not necessarily true with frass. So there's definitely some trial and error to undertake when you're making your processing decisions. And lastly, I just want to highlight that most of us are in this business, we're in constant production, meaning we're generating frass 365 days of the year. And for countries that are in the higher latitudes where farming doesn't happen year round, that means that we're going to be having to look for storage and warehousing solutions for frass as well, so that we can get it to the farmer at the times that they need it in the spring and the fall. So the good news again is that none of these challenges are insurmountable, but it does shed light on some of the considerations to be had when commercializing a product like insect frass. So this is my last slide, and it's just addressing the opportunity for the shared transatlantic efforts in the future of FRAS. So firstly, I think that we can cooperate on the development of the market by increasing the awareness of FRAS among farming and growing communities. By doing this, we can assure them our supply and our market readiness and the evidence to support the return on investment. We can also collaborate and share our scientific findings within our industry, but that includes translating information between languages so that everyone has access to the latest information. And we can promote actual farmer and grower success stories and of our farming champions and share the research findings with our customers or interested parties as evidence to debunk some of the myths and alleviate some concerns, as well as repair any tarnished FRAS reputations from the really early days. I think it's important that we do keep alert for and participate in the calls for consultation and regulatory or industry standards development, just to make sure that we're representing the different types of companies that are existing or the types of nonprofits that are in the insect industry as well. For Aspire, we've really kept up with the opportunities to integrate technology and innovations into our operation. And I encourage you to take those technology and innovation opportunities to your advantage too. And whether that's to improve your collection methods, your processing, or your packaging, or even your distribution, there's certainly funds to be leveraged, and there's opportunities for mutual gain with other industries. So with all of these collaborative opportunities, there's a consideration in terms of your cultural environment as well, for where your insect farms are located, and working with your local growers to understand their needs and their hesitations. So that's something to definitely consider where you're setting up your operation. And within the insect industry, we can be inclusive of the insect producers of all sizes, knowing that some of us are social enterprises, others are sole proprietorships, and some are nonprofits. So having that well-represented community come to events like this and engage with each other, I think is really excellent. And lastly is that it's imperative that we maintain sustainability as the keystone of both the FRAS industry and the insect industry. At the end of the day, that's ultimately the driving force behind this business. And I think it's fantastic that we're championing real world solutions to feed our growing population in ways with less environmental impact. And by producing alternative sources of both protein and fertilizer, we're creating these new pathways to exemplify the circular economy of renewable bioresources. It's a pleasure to be part of this industry, and I'm so eager to see how we continue to grow into the future. So thanks, that's all I have today.
Thank you very much, Kelsey. Well, I'd like to invite our sort of additional speakers. Jessica Fitch is the representative of the European Organic-Based Fertilizer Industry Consortium, IPIFF. And I think it'll be really interesting to hear her thoughts on this, because as Chloe and Kelsey have mentioned, we need to work out what the consumers, the farmers, the gardeners will make of this, and how, what is their demands, what are their needs, what are their concerns, how do we answer those? So Jessica, over to you.
Thank you very much. Yep, I'm here representing IPIFF, so the European Consortium of the Organic-Based Fertilizer Industry, and we represent European manufacturers of organic fertilizers, organomineral fertilizers, and organic soil improvers, as well as their component materials. So first of all, I want to say that insect frass is a very attractive emerging component material for organic-based fertilizers. This is particularly because of its high organic matter content, above 80%. Its high dry matter content, which makes it easier to store and handle. And it's comparatively high in nitrogen content compared to other manures. Like other organic-based fertilizers, those derived from insect frass deliver organic forms of nutrients to plants and add carbon to soils, as we've heard from the other speakers on frass here today. They help to improve plant nutrition, but also soil fertility. In terms of EU policy objectives, we think this is particularly relevant, and because organic-based fertilizers, including those based on insect frass, deliver on several policy objectives, including within the farm to fork strategy, which has already been mentioned today, which aims to reduce chemical fertilizer use and increase organic farming. So both of those are particularly relevant to insect frass. And of course, as has already been mentioned, there is huge potential for organic-based fertilizers to contribute to the carbon storage capacity of agricultural soils on both sides of the Atlantic. And this is particularly relevant for insect frass, considering its high organic matter content. Also, we've heard a little bit about the ongoing global supply constraints related to traditional mineral fertilizers. So we certainly think there's a really timely and huge opportunity for organic-based fertilizers, including those based on insect frass, to really come to the fore in Europe, but also across the world. But of course, there are challenges relating to the use of insect frass as organic fertilizers. In Europe, these include regulatory challenges, and then I think there are other challenges that have also been raised by Kelsey relating to farmer uptake, both which relevant for Europe and the US. First of all, in terms of regulatory constraints in Europe, IPIFF certainly welcomes the addition, so the definition of and recognition of insect frass in the EU legislation, which Chloe spoke about, and the inclusion in the animal byproducts regulation, including with set established requirements related to the hygienization of insect frass. However, there are currently regulatory constraints in Europe related to the incoming EU fertilizer regulation. So the new EU regulation on fertilizers is set to apply this July. And it foresees the use of animal byproducts as components in EU fertilizing products. It foresees the access for organic-based fertilizers to the EU single market for the first time. So we are very much looking forward to the application of this regulation. However, unfortunately, there have been some delays related to the animal byproducts regulation and defining endpoints so that those animal byproducts can be included in the EU fertilizer regulation. And this also affects hygienized insect frass. So in terms of trying to get those products on the EU market as quickly as possible, relevant endpoints still need to be defined. And IPIFF, alongside 10 other associations, have issued a media release urging the institutions, especially in the current context, to act in order to define endpoints for animal byproducts for fertilizing products, including an endpoint for hygienized insect frass. And we certainly welcome any support from any participants, or in particular IPIFF, in these efforts, because we know that it affects you too. Then beyond kind of regulatory challenges, IPIFF has really identified challenges related to farmer uptake. So farmers are unwilling to take up organic fertilizers, we've found, due to a persistent assumption that they are less reliable and more expensive than their mineral counterparts. This is despite the fact that organic-based fertilizing products have consistent and balanced nutrient content when refined, and are processed to guarantee safety from pathogens and contaminants. And of course, the relative gap in price between mineral and organic fertilizing products is rapidly reducing in the current context. So in terms of how to address these challenges, we believe it's crucial to improve both the exchange of best practices for plant nutrition and soil health, including the use of organic-based fertilizers, improve research innovation in the sector, incentivization of farmer uptake of organic-based fertilizers, and education and training for farmers and their farm advisors on the benefits of these products, including those derived from insect frass, on both sides of the Atlantic. And we'd certainly be happy as IPIFF to exchange and cooperate with ideas and suggestions about how to better do that. More important than ever, we think, in the current global context, and the importance of the West to be able to improve their self-sufficiency in fertilizer supply. And so IPIFF would certainly be interested in engaging with any insect producers, particularly as we've recently enlarged our membership criteria to include producers of component materials of organic-based fertilizing products, as well as the final products themselves. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Jessica. Now we're due to hear from Virginia Emery, but I know she's had several power outages during the webinar already. So can I check if she is on the call?
Hello, still here.
Hi. Oh, still here. Wonderful. Okay. Well, so Virginia Emery is the founder and CEO of Better Hatch, and she is also the president of the board of NACIA. So would you like to share your thoughts, please, and for us?
Yeah, we're extremely excited about the opportunities within these fertilizer and also feed markets for frass. I think that one of the things that is commonly overlooked by a lot of investors in our sector is the importance and value of frass, both as a volume of product that is produced by the insect sector and also as a real opportunity for everyone who's involved to derive some value on a revenue basis and start creating some value for producers as well. As has already been mentioned, there are a lot of challenges with potential seasonality of those markets, which contrasts a lot of the year-round demand for our insect products. And so I think starting to forge more relationships with other indoor producers is going to be a really fantastic opportunity for our sector. In general, I think there's a really underexplored value of frass from a biological perspective. And so I think our industry needs to work at developing some stronger partnerships and strengthening already very strong partnerships with researchers and agronomists and those who have interests in the health of soils and the health of plants and plant growth. So I think, ourselves as a producer of frass, as a primary producer of mealworms, and also my role at NACIA in encouraging the growth of the industry and the growth of the sector really depends on frass as being a key part of that equation.
Thank you very much. Chloe and Kelsey, did you want to comment about Virginia's points or Jessica's points?
I think it sounds like we're all on the same page, honestly, which is really nice to have in the industry. And that I think we've all emphasized this attention on soil health. But I do want to pick up on Virginia's point about the microbiological opportunities to investigate within frass. And particularly because our feedstocks are different and our rearing systems are different and our harvesting systems are different within the industry. I'm really interested also to see what type of microbes are interested in the different or in the different types of frass, and start to pick out the ones that could really make more of a difference for certain crops, for instance. So I think that's a really interesting opportunity.
I don't think I have anything to add. I think collaboration in this area is really key, as if it's a new fertilizer, but it's going to be available in large quantities, which is much needed by the industry. I agree with Virginia's point that is very much overlooked by some players, but frass is the first product in terms of volumes for the insect industry, and there is a huge need for it. It's not a byproduct. So I think collaboration will help us accelerate the growth of the sector and more generally to best meet the demand and the needs of our different partners and farmers.
Yeah, and I think I would just lastly add that I think there's an opportunity with multiple insect species being developed to start to also speak to the commonalities and the differentiators among those different production systems. And I think this is an opportunity to create some standardization, but also to ensure that we maintain really high value of an ingredient that I think has a lot of promise to get a premium price in the marketplace as well, because of some real encouraging performance studies that a lot of us are seeing.
Brilliant, thank you so much. Okay, I'm going to close it here for our first session. Thank you to all the panelists for your input. And I'm just going to wrap up the webinar with just a couple of thoughts from all the presentations today. I'll start with the sort of motherhood and apple pie things that we've heard, which is basically we need more research and then more collaboration. I think the really lovely thing about today is that everyone seems to be really keen to collaborate. So I think this can only be the greatest takeaway from today's webinar, is that everyone is keen to work together to move things forward, be it on food, feed, or frass. And then I think a couple of really interesting points for me that kind of people sort of often ask me is, why insect and why are you interested in this? And I always say to them, this is not coming up in a vacuum. It is coming up because we need more protein, we need more sustainable protein, and we need greater circular economy. And I think this point was made really salient today about sort of the supply chain issues that we've seen lately with COVID, with the war in Ukraine, with the fertilizer shortage. Insect farming is a solution to tackle all of these issues. It can provide greater food security. It can improve the resilience of farming. It can sort of give greater protein sufficiency to nation states. It can improve the provision of local fertilizers. So I think insect farming can sort of tick a lot of these boxes. I think on the sort of circularity angle as well, as been mentioned, this is really fast moving, but a really important point. So you are sort of taking something that's not wanted, you turning it into protein and frass, and then you're putting it back into the system as food, animal feed, or as fertilizer. And so this is really the very modern day, very contemporary appeal of that particular sector. And then sort of just a couple of last points about how new and how fast moving this industry still is. We can see last year there were so many regulatory developments, both in the EU and North America. And so to keep on top of that is obviously quite a feat, and IPIFF and NACIA are doing a sterling job of that, of disseminating the information. There were a couple of questions in the chat boxes about resources. I suggest, these would be your sort of first point of contact. So there is also sort of an Australian and New Zealand association, there's an Asian association. So you can sort of find these resources, but also the fact that it is so fast moving, it does mean that sort of you have to be nimble and flexible. And I think that's been mentioned in a couple of presentations about the fact that, things are still changing, and something that's not allowed now may very well be in a year's time, or even in just a few months' time. So, it's going to keep everyone on their feet. So, I think, and then the last thing I wanted to mention, which I thought was really lovely, and which has been mentioned to me a few times, is farmers are farmers. And I like what Akisi said about trying to bring new, sort of old generation farmers or legacy farmers to the new world of insect farming, and how we make sort of that transition. And I think, that ties in with sort of making sort of insects not just niche, but also being part of the greater mainstream sort of farming food system, and just our greater food system. So I think on this, I'd like to close. Thank you so much for your time, all your questions. If they weren't answered today, I apologize, but please do reach out to IPIFF NACIA and all the speakers today. I wish you a good day and a good evening. Thank you very much.